Behind the golden walls of the Ottoman palace, the Sultan's most private life was ruled by the strangest and most chilling bedroom laws. Rules that decided who lived, who died, and even who would control the empire. These weren't just secrets of desire, they were the hidden laws that shaped history itself. Stay with us till the end to uncover the shocking truths of the Imperial Harem. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of history's darkest secrets. The Imperial Harem, often imagined as a place of luxury, seduction, and endless pleasures, was in reality a world far more complex, far more controlled, and far more mysterious than most people could ever imagine. Behind the guarded walls of the palaces, where outsiders were never allowed to enter, a secret set of rules dictated the lives of the women and men who lived there. These were not simply rules about etiquette or courtly manners. They were strict, sometimes bizarre, bedroom rules that decided who would rise, who would fall, and who would simply disappear into the shadows of history. In this story, we begin a journey into that hidden world, peeling back the silken curtains and uncovering secrets that have been whispered about for centuries but rarely told in detail. The harem was not just about beauty, though beauty played an enormous role. It was about power. Every woman who entered the harem, whether brought in as a slave, offered as a gift from a foreign ruler, or chosen from among the empire's most beautiful maidens, came with the dream of rising to the Sultan's favor. Yet that dream was always balanced against the reality of countless rivals and a system of rules that turned the Sultan's bedroom into a battlefield. In the grand palaces of the Ottoman Empire, where the Imperial Harem reached its most legendary form, these rules were carved into daily life. One of the strangest rules was about selection itself. The Sultan did not simply call for whichever woman he desired. Instead, eunuchs, castrated men, who served as guards and gatekeepers of the harem, played a central role in organizing the nights. Every evening, the chief black eunuch, one of the most powerful men in the empire, despite technically being a servant, would receive word of the Sultan's wishes. If the Sultan gave no preference, then it was up to the eunuchs and sometimes the valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, to decide who would be presented. The women were not free to make their own choices. Even the Sultan's choice was often shaped by the political games of those around him. The women, knowing this, lived under constant pressure. They had to remain clean, presentable, and prepared at all times. Baths were taken frequently, perfumes of rosewater and ambergris applied to the skin, and clothing carefully chosen to highlight their charms. But behind all of this, beauty was a set of hidden rules. One rule demanded that no woman could ever directly approach the Sultan for intimacy. To do so without being summoned was punishable, sometimes even with banishment from the harem. The Sultan alone had the authority to decide who would be with him on any given night, though in reality, as we have seen, this was often influenced by politics. There was also the rule of silence. When a woman was chosen to be with the Sultan, she had to obey the rule of speaking only when spoken to. The Sultan's bedroom was not a place for chatter or demands. It was a sacred and political space, where every move, every word, and every expression could mean advancement or downfall. Women who failed to observe silence, who spoke too freely or displeased the Sultan, could find themselves immediately dismissed. For those who had spent years training, grooming, and hoping for such a chance, one mistake could mean the end of their ambitions. Another unusual rule was about purity. Women were carefully monitored to ensure that they were untouched before being presented to the Sultan. Midwives and older women of the harem, sometimes under the supervision of eunuchs, carried out For outsiders, this might seem shocking, but in the politics of the harem, a woman's purity was tied to legitimacy. If she became pregnant by the Sultan, her child could one day inherit the throne. To avoid scandal or doubt, strict surveillance was kept. It was not just about intimacy. It was about dynastic survival. Once chosen, a woman had to follow yet another rule. She could never sleep in the Sultan's chamber overnight unless specifically ordered. In most cases, after the evening was spent, she would be escorted back to her own quarters before dawn. This prevented women from gaining too much influence or from making themselves seem like permanent companions. Only those who bore sons, or who gained exceptional favor, could ever hope to remain close for longer periods. The separation was part of the system, ensuring that no single woman could dominate unless fate and politics allowed it. But the strangest bedroom rules often involved the hierarchy among the women themselves. Within the harem, not all women were equal. At the top stood the valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning Sultan. Her power extended over everyone, including her son's consorts. Below her were the Hazadalik, the Sultan's favorites, the women who were chosen most often. Then came the ordinary concubines, whose chances of ever being noticed were slim. To maintain order, rules dictated how women should behave in the Sultan's presence. No one was allowed to make eye contact unless given permission. No one could wear certain colors unless it was granted to them. Even the way they bowed, walked, or carried themselves in the Sultan's chamber was dictated by custom. Behind the curtain of silk and gold, jealousy burned hot. Women competed fiercely, and because the rules were strict, they looked for any small advantage to catch the Sultan's eye. Perfumed oils, secret dances, whispered songs, each woman had her own ways of standing out. But always, the rules remained. Disobeying them meant punishment, and sometimes that punishment was severe. A woman who overstepped her role could be cast out of the palace, married off to a lesser official, or worse, executed quietly. Her name erased from the records. Another deeply strange rule was about motherhood. Once a woman gave birth to a son by the Sultan, her relationship with him changed forever. The rule was clear. She could never again be intimate with the Sultan. Her role shifted from concubine to the mother of a prince, a shift that came with new power but also new dangers. This ensured that no prince had siblings from the same mother, avoiding rival factions forming around full brothers. It was a cold, calculated rule designed to preserve balance within the dynasty, but it turned women's lives upside down. For those who had tasted favor and then found themselves locked into motherhood without intimacy, it was a bitter change. The Sultan's own role in this system was also strange. For many outsiders, the image of a sultan surrounded by women suggested he had limitless freedom. But even he was bound by tradition. He could not, for example, choose the same woman too often unless she had already become a Hazada. Doing so would upset the delicate balance of the harem, creating jealousy and instability. He could not take wives as freely as common men. Even his intimacy was observed, recorded, and sometimes dictated by court officials to ensure political harmony. And then there were the symbolic rules. When a woman entered the Sultan's chamber, she had to bow, kiss the ground, and wait for the Sultan's gesture before approaching. The clothing she wore was sometimes chosen by the valid Sultan herself. Even the jewels, the arrangement of hair, and the colors of silk were not always her choice. Everything was calculated to display order, discipline, and control, rather than passion or freedom. Yet, despite these restrictions, the harem was full of ambition. Every woman who entered believed she might become more than just a servant. She might become a favorite. She might become the mother of a future sultan. The bedroom rules, though strange and strict, were the gateway to that ambition. For many, the rules were worth enduring if they offered even a chance at such unimaginable power. But power always came at a price. And for the women of the Imperial Harem, that price was obedience to rules that most of us today would find deeply strange, even disturbing. As we peel away more layers of the harem, the story only grows darker, stranger, and more revealing about how power, politics, and desire shaped history in ways the world still feels today. If the Imperial Harem was a world of beauty and splendor on the surface, beneath it was a constant web of rules, rivalries, and dangers that shaped every moment of life. By the time a concubine reached her place within the palace walls, she had already been stripped of her old identity. She was no longer simply a daughter or a village girl. She was now property of the Sultan, though with the chance of becoming something far greater. Yet this chance was guarded by strict traditions and unyielding rules that turned the Sultan's most private spaces into carefully controlled battlegrounds. One of the most bizarre aspects was the nightly ritual of selection, which outsiders rarely understood. The Sultan's chamber was not entered casually. On nights when the Sultan gave no personal instruction, the chief black eunuch was tasked with choosing which woman would be sent to him. Sometimes, he would consult with the valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who had enormous influence over her son's personal life. At times, the choice was purely political. If a certain family or faction needed to be strengthened, a girl from that background might be chosen to gain favor. The Sultan might not even know the depth of the manipulation, though in many cases he allowed it. The harem was not just about pleasure. It was a tool of governance. The chosen woman would undergo preparations. She would be bathed in scented water, her hair perfumed with oils of jasmine and rose, her skin rubbed with ambergris or musk. Clothing was carefully selected, flowing silks, often white or pale colors, symbols of purity and elegance. She would then be escorted by eunuchs, sometimes trembling, sometimes excited, toward the Sultan's private chambers. There, another strange rule awaited. She could not touch the Sultan unless he extended his hand first. She could not speak unless addressed. The power dynamic was absolute, but perhaps the most controlling rule of all was the rule of secrecy. What happened inside the Sultan's chamber could never be spoken of to anyone else. Not to other concubines, not to attendants, not even whispered in passing. Breaking this rule was considered one of the greatest crimes within the harem. A woman who revealed details of her intimacy with the Sultan risked punishment that could range from banishment to execution. Silence was survival. For this reason, the harem became a place where rumors thrived, but truths were rare. The politics extended even deeper into the bedroom. One peculiar custom involved fruit and sweets. It was said that sometimes, before intimacy, the Sultan and his chosen companion would share bowls of sugared almonds, sherbet, or exotic fruits brought from distant lands. To outsiders, this seemed romantic, but to the women of the harem, it was part of a test. The way a woman served the Sultan, the way she behaved during such moments, all became part of her evaluation. A misstep, offering food too quickly, showing too much eagerness could leave a poor impression. Even the smallest gesture was weighed against her. Perhaps the cruelest rule was what came after childbirth. For most women, being chosen by the Sultan was the highest honor. But true power only came with motherhood. If a concubine gave birth to a son, her status changed forever. She became the Sultan's concubine no longer, but the mother of a prince, a title known as a Haseki Sultan. However, along with this elevation came an iron rule. She could never again share the Sultan's bed. Her intimacy with him ended the moment she gave him a child. The reasoning behind this was not personal, but political. By keeping mothers tied to a single son, the court prevented brothers from forming alliances against each other, a problem that had often destabilized dynasties in the past. This rule created a strange reality. A woman who once enjoyed the Sultan's favor could suddenly find herself sidelined, her role reduced to overseeing her child's upbringing and navigating the deadly world of palace politics. For some, this was a blessing. For others, it was a cruel exile from the intimacy they once craved. And yet, every concubine secretly wished for it, because a son meant power. Daughters, while still important, did not grant the same security. A woman with no child risked fading into obscurity or being married off to a court official. Her time in the palace, nothing more than a memory. Another strikingly strange rule was about the physical separation of the Sultan's chambers. Despite being surrounded by women, the Sultan rarely moved freely among them. The harem was divided into sections, each with different levels of access. Only the chosen women, the favorites, could ever come close. Even then, the approach to the Sultan's private quarters was guarded by layer after layer of doors and eunuchs. It was said that sometimes, even the Sultan himself had to announce his intention to enter his own private chambers. So absolute was the authority of the chief eunuch in controlling access. The eunuch, in fact, formed one of the strangest aspects of this world. Castrated in youth and often taken from Africa or Eastern Europe, they became the silent gatekeepers of the Sultan's most intimate life. They knew every secret, every rule, every ritual, but they themselves were forbidden from ever speaking of it. Their loyalty was demanded, and their punishment for betrayal was swift. Yet their power was undeniable. A concubine who earned the favor of a eunuch might find herself better positioned to gain access to the Sultan. A eunuch's whisper could make or break a woman's future. Thus, alliances formed not only between women but between women and the men who guarded them. Life inside the harem was also shaped by superstition. Strange bedroom rules were not only political but spiritual. It was believed that certain nights, such as Thursdays, were more auspicious for intimacy. Certain foods, like honey and almonds, were said to bring fertility and strength, and so they were consumed before being presented to the Sultan. Amulets, charms, and verses from the Quran were often sewn into clothing or placed discreetly in the chamber to ward off evil spirits or jealousy. These superstitions intertwined with official rules, making the bedroom a place of both sacred ritual and raw ambition. Even the architecture of the harem reflected its rules. The Sultan's bedchamber was often designed with high ceilings, heavy curtains, and elaborate carpets, but it was also built with hidden doors and passageways. These allowed the Sultan to enter or exit without being seen, maintaining secrecy and control. For the women, being escorted through those secret paths was part of the ritual, a reminder that they were not just companions but pieces in a greater game. Rivalry among the women was another constant. They lived in close quarters, training together in music, dance, embroidery, and poetry. But beneath the surface, each dreamed of being chosen. Sometimes the rules extended to the smallest details. Who could wear certain jewelry? Who could use certain perfumes? Even who could sit closest to the Sultan during banquets? These small privileges were jealously guarded. To break the rules of hierarchy was to invite punishment, sometimes from the Sultan himself, but more often from the valid Sultan or senior concubines. The punishments themselves were as strange as the rules. A woman who defied the hierarchy might be forced into menial labor, stripped of her fine clothing, or confined to a lesser part of the palace. In extreme cases, she might be sent to the Old Palace, a place where former concubines lived out their lives in seclusion once their usefulness had ended. Though not always deadly, this exile was feared by all. It was a slow fading away, a reminder that the Sultan's attention was fleeting and that favor could vanish overnight. And yet, despite the harshness, the harem continued to thrive for centuries. Women entered willingly, sometimes even desperately, because the rewards were too great to ignore. A single night of favor could lead to riches, influence, and a legacy that lasted generations. Many concubines who followed these strange bedroom rules went on to become some of the most powerful women in Ottoman history, guiding their sons as they rose to the throne, and ruling the empire from behind the veil. But what makes these rules so fascinating is not just their strangeness, but the way they reveal the truth about power. The Sultan, though mighty, was bound by tradition. The women, though seemingly powerless, learned to use the rules to their advantage. The eunuchs, though outsiders, held influence over the very heart of the empire. It was a delicate balance, where every rule had meaning, and every gesture could change the course of history. The story of the Imperial Harem is not just about desire or luxury. It is about discipline, strategy, and the strange rules that governed one of the most secretive and powerful institutions in the world. As we continue deeper into this tale, the secrets only grow stranger, and the bedroom that most private of spaces reveals itself to be one of the greatest stages of political intrigue history has ever known. If the earlier rules of the Imperial Harem seem unusual, the deeper one looks, the stranger they become. For behind the silken curtains and perfumed air of the Sultan's palace, the bedroom was never only about intimacy. It was a battlefield dressed in velvet, a place where love, duty, fear, and ambition all collided in silence. By the time the sun set and the great palace grew quiet, the harem came alive with whispers, preparations, and rituals that were centuries old. One of the most curious rules concerned the presentation of the concubines. The Sultan never went to them. Instead, they were brought to him like precious offerings. The chief eunuch would oversee the ritual, ensuring that everything was performed according to tradition. The woman chosen was not simply walked into the chamber. She was carried, wrapped in silken sheets, almost as if she were a rare jewel being delivered to its owner. This act was deeply symbolic. The Sultan was too exalted to have women approach him casually, and the woman herself had to appear both passive and desirable. She was expected to embody obedience, while at the same time radiating beauty and charm. Even stranger was the ritual silence. The women were forbidden to speak unless the Sultan asked them a question. If he wished to hear music or poetry, they were expected to perform perfectly. If he wished for silence, no word could leave their lips. The Sultan's moods were law, and a woman's ability to read them determined her fate. Many concubines trained for years to master subtle forms of body language, learning how to appear graceful without being bold, how to show affection without overstepping the boundary. Every detail of her behavior was a test, and failure meant being forgotten. Another unusual practice involved cleanliness and purity. Before entering the Sultan's bed, the chosen woman was bathed in rosewater, her body perfumed, her nails carefully painted with henna, and her hair brushed with combs of ivory or gold. This ritual was not just about beauty, it was also meant to protect the Sultan from illness. The empire could not afford a ruler weakened by disease, so women were strictly inspected by palace doctors before being allowed into his presence. If a concubine showed signs of sickness, even something as small as a cough, she could be banned from the Sultan's chambers indefinitely. Health became a weapon. Rivals sometimes whispered rumors of illness to keep one another away from the Sultan's side. Superstition added another layer of strangeness. Certain nights were considered unlucky, and intimacy was strictly forbidden on those occasions. Astrologers within the palace often advised the Sultan on the best nights for union, claiming that the stars and moon could influence fertility and destiny. Concubines sometimes wore amulets sewn into their undergarments, believing that these charms would protect them from rivals or help them conceive a son. Others placed tiny Quranic verses beneath their pillows, hoping to bring blessings upon the night. Whether the Sultan noticed or cared was unknown, but for the women, every advantage mattered. Perhaps the most fascinating rule was what happened if a concubine conceived. Unlike ordinary women, who might celebrate openly, palace women lived in constant suspense. Pregnancy brought both power and danger. A concubine who bore a son could rise to the status of Hasaki Sultan, the Sultan's official consort and the mother of a prince. But with that rise came new restrictions. Once she had given birth to a son, she was forbidden from sharing the Sultan's bed ever again. This ensured that she would remain loyal to her child alone and prevented her from having multiple sons who could later fight for the throne. This rule shaped the lives of countless women. Some concubines feared having sons too early, because it would end their chance of being the Sultan's favorite. Others longed for it, knowing it was their only path to real power. The irony was cruel. The very act that secured a woman's position in history also took her away from the Sultan's side forever. The palace was filled with stories of women who wept after giving birth, torn between joy for their child and grief for the intimacy they could never again share. The Sultan's chamber itself held secrets. Hidden passageways allowed him to move unseen, entering or leaving without notice. Some nights, he would choose a woman without the eunuchs, announcing it, appearing in her quarters unexpectedly. Yet even in these moments, the rules remained. The woman had to bow her head, wait for his command, and accept his presence as a gift rather than a right. To deny him, or even to hesitate, was unthinkable. Punishments for breaking these rules were severe. A concubine who spoke of her time with the Sultan risked banishment. Some were sent to the Old Palace, a place of faded glory where former concubines lived out their days in obscurity. Others were married off to distant officials, sent away from the palace forever. In darker cases, there were whispers of women who simply vanished, their fates never recorded, their names erased from history. To displease the Sultan was dangerous, but to displease the valid Sultan, his mother, was even worse. She held the real authority within the harem, and her word was final. The valid Sultan's role in these rules cannot be overstated. As the mother of the ruler, she controlled the politics of the harem with an iron hand. Sometimes she chose which concubines were sent to her son, shaping his private life to suit her political strategies. If she disliked a woman, that woman's chances of ever reaching the sultan's chamber were almost non-existent. Some concubines tried to flatter the valid sultan with gifts, songs, or poetry, hoping to win her favor. Others formed alliances with eunuchs, who often served as spies, reporting every word and action to the sultan's mother. The harem was not only the sultan's domain, it was the valid's empire. Even the act of entering the sultan's chamber was strange. Women were not allowed to walk in freely. They were escorted by eunuchs, their faces veiled, their movements restricted. Some traditions required the concubine to bow 3 times before approaching the bed, a symbolic gesture of humility and loyalty. Once inside, she could not initiate conversation. If the sultan ignored her, she had to wait in silence until dismissed. To fall asleep before he did was forbidden. She had to remain alert, a symbol of her devotion and readiness. The hierarchy among women added another layer of tension. Senior concubines often imposed their own rules on the younger ones. A girl who showed too much eagerness risked being accused of arrogance. A girl who seemed too shy might be labeled unworthy. The competition was constant, and every gesture was judged. Sometimes, rivalries turned deadly. There are stories of women poisoning one another's perfumes or food, hoping to eliminate competition. Whether these tales are exaggerated or not, they reveal the atmosphere of suspicion that ruled the harem's private world. Music and entertainment also played a part in the sultan's bedroom rituals. Before intimacy, some women were asked to sing, dance, or recite poetry. This was not optional. It was a test of their refinement and training. A concubine who failed to please in these performances might never be chosen again. But a woman who impressed the sultan with her voice or her wit could secure his attention for weeks. In this way, talent became as important as beauty, and the bedroom became a stage where the empire's future might be decided by a single song. Another rule involved gifts. Sometimes, after a night with the sultan, a concubine was given jewels, coins, or fine clothing. But the gifts carried meaning. A small trinket might indicate mere politeness, while a rare jewel signaled favor. Women learned to read these silent messages, measuring their standing by the treasures they received. But they could not show greed. Asking for more was forbidden, and appearing dissatisfied was dangerous. Gratitude had to be shown, no matter the size of the gift. The secrecy surrounding these rituals extended beyond the harem walls. Foreign ambassadors who visited the Ottoman court often speculated about what happened in the sultan's chambers, but no one truly knew. The eunuchs and women of the harem guarded their silence fiercely. Even centuries later, historians struggle to separate fact from legend. Some accounts describe nightly orgies, while others insist that the rules were so strict that intimacy was rare and carefully controlled. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, shaped by tradition, politics, and superstition. And yet, for all these rules, the sultan himself was not always free. Tradition bound him as tightly as it bound the women. He could not take any woman he wished at random. There were procedures, expectations, and customs that he, too, had to follow. In many ways, the sultan was as much a prisoner of the harem as its women were. His bedroom was his throne, but also his cage. The more one studies these strange rules, the clearer it becomes that the imperial harem was not a place of indulgence alone. It was a machine of power, designed to control desire, channel ambition, and protect the throne. Every rule had a purpose, no matter how odd it seemed. The bedroom was not private, it was political, and every concubine who entered it carried the hopes of her family, the ambitions of factions, and the heavy weight of survival. In the next part of this story, the secrets of the harem grow even darker, from hidden betrayals to the rituals surrounding death and succession. The final chapter reveals just how far these strange bedroom rules reached into the heart of an empire. As the centuries passed, the strange bedroom rules of the imperial harem grew even more entangled with politics, superstition, and survival. By now, the harem was not simply a collection of women behind palace walls. It was the beating heart of an empire, a place where whispers in the night could shift armies, topple viziers, and decide who would inherit the throne. The bedroom was the stage, and the rules that governed it were the invisible strings pulling the empire forward. One of the most shocking rules was the fate of the sultan's sons. The harem was filled with women, many of whom bore children, but not every son could live. In Ottoman tradition, only one heir could inherit the throne. When a sultan died, it was often followed by a grim ritual called fratricide. The new sultan was expected to have his brothers executed, ensuring no rival claimant could threaten his rule. This cruel law shaped the harem's atmosphere in terrifying ways. For a concubine, giving birth to a son was both her greatest hope and her greatest fear. Her child could rise to the throne and make her the most powerful woman in the empire, or he could be strangled with a silken bowstring in the dead of night. The women knew this, and every pregnancy carried both glory and doom. Because of this, the sultan's bedroom was heavily regulated. Only certain women were allowed to conceive, and the valid sultan often intervened to control the balance. A concubine might be chosen for her intelligence, her family's connections, or even her quiet obedience, but her fate was never her own. The decision of who would share the sultan's bed was always political. Behind the silks and perfumes, the future of the empire was being written. One secret encounter at a time. Even more unsettling were the rules about loyalty. A concubine's devotion was expected to be absolute. She could not look at another man, not even a eunuch, with warmth. She was not permitted to form friendships outside the harem walls. The Sultan's shadow followed her everywhere, even when he was not present. If she was discovered writing a secret letter or exchanging a private glance, the punishment could be severe. Sometimes it meant banishment to the old palace, where women lived in isolation, stripped of influence. Other times, it meant silent disappearance, a fate so feared that the women rarely even whispered about it. Death, itself, was surrounded by ritual. If a concubine died, her body was often carried out of the palace quietly, veiled and hidden, so that the secrets of her life would never leave the harem. The Sultan did not attend funerals. Mourning was private, controlled, and often short. In a place where beauty was currency, youth and health determined survival. A dead concubine was quickly replaced by another, and life in the harem continued as though nothing had changed. To dwell on loss was forbidden. The empire moved forward, always hungry for new heirs, new alliances, and new stories. Another bizarre tradition involved dreams. Many concubines believed that dreams carried divine messages. Some kept dream journals, secretly recording visions of the night and interpreting them as signs of their future. If a woman dreamed of water, she might believe it meant pregnancy. If she dreamed of blood, she might fear betrayal. Eunuchs sometimes acted as interpreters, whispering meanings and feeding the women's hopes or fears. Strangely, even sultans were known to consult dream interpreters before choosing which woman to summon. A single dream could determine who would share the ruler's bed, turning superstition into a weapon as powerful as beauty itself. The Sultan's nights were not always spent in indulgence. Sometimes, he used the harem for political theater. Foreign ambassadors were told tales of his countless lovers, his unrivaled power, his endless passion. The truth was often exaggerated, but the image was enough to inspire awe. The Sultan's virility became a symbol of the empire's strength, and the women of the harem were seen as proof of his divine favor. But behind closed doors, the rules remained. Even the Sultan could not escape tradition, for the harem was as much a prison for him as it was for the women. In later centuries, the rules became even stricter. During times of instability, sultans were confined to the palace and kept under close watch by their mothers and advisors. The harem became both a sanctuary and a cage, where every movement was monitored. Some rulers grew frustrated, finding themselves controlled by the very system meant to serve them. Others surrendered to it, allowing the rituals to dictate every aspect of their private lives. The women, too, learned to adapt. Some became masters of manipulation, using the rules to strengthen their position. Others lived quietly, hoping only to survive. The strangest rules of all concerned intimacy itself. Many sultans believed that too much indulgence weakened the body and mind. Palace doctors often advised moderation, warning that excessive desire could shorten a ruler's life. Some even set limits on how often the sultan could visit the harem, turning the bedroom into a carefully scheduled duty rather than a personal pleasure. In this way, even the most private moments of the empire's most powerful man were dictated by the empire's needs. His body was not his own, it belonged to the state. The harem's influence stretched far beyond its walls. Decisions made in the bedroom could determine alliances, wars, and the fate of millions. A concubine's whisper in the night could sway the sultan's heart, changing the course of history. But she could never admit this power openly. Outwardly, she was a servant, bound by rules that silenced her voice and chained her future. Inwardly, she was a strategist, playing the most dangerous game in the world. Generations of women lived and died under these strange bedroom rules. Some became legends, remembered for their beauty, their wit, or their sons. Others vanished, their names erased, their lives reduced to whispers in forgotten corridors. Yet all of them were part of the same hidden world, where the most private acts were never truly private, and where the fate of an empire rested on the quiet rituals of the night. To us today, these rules may seem bizarre, even cruel. But within the Imperial Harem, they were normal, accepted, and necessary. They protected the throne, controlled desire, and ensured the survival of a dynasty that ruled for centuries. The harem was not merely a place of pleasure, it was the engine of an empire, built on silence, secrecy, and the strangest rules history has ever known. And so, the story of the harem's bedroom rules ends, not with indulgence, but with control. Every ritual, every law, every superstition was designed to keep power within reach of the throne and out of the hands of rivals. The women who lived there, the eunuchs who enforced the rules, and the sultans themselves were all bound together by a system that was as fragile as it was powerful. In the end, the Imperial Harem remains one of history's greatest paradoxes, a place of beauty and cruelty, desire and duty, freedom and captivity. And behind its locked doors, the strangest bedroom rules of all time shaped the destiny of an empire.